Welcome back, everyone. Is graduate school key to your public service career? Can you afford it on a public interest salary? When should you go? While our next panelists cannot specifically answer these questions for you, they can give tips and suggestions to help you think the possibility of graduate school with a public service career in mind. So I'm delighted to introduce our three panelists. Presenting first will be Brianna Suarez, who currently serves as the International Admissions and Operations Manager at the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs, affectionately known as APSIA. In her position, she guides prospective students to find the right graduate school program for their careers, works internally with member schools, and works with outside partners and employers on hiring qualified candidates for positions across multiple sectors of international affairs and public policy. She completed her undergraduate degree in international affairs and French at the State University of New York, New Paltz, and graduated with a Master's of Arts in Security Policy Studies from the Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University, where she specialized in conflict resolution and intelligence. Prior to serving at her position at APSIA, she worked with Doctors Without Borders, or Médecins Sans Frontières. Next, we will hear from Phi Beta Kappa member Laurel McFarland, the Executive Director of the Network of Schools of Public Affairs, the Network of Schools of Public Policy, Affairs, and Administration.
You can just call us NASPA. That's a lot easier.
Thank you. So NASPA is a membership association with over 300 institutional member schools at U.S. and non-U.S. universities that award degrees in public administration, public policy, public affairs, nonprofit, and related fields. It is the recognized global accreditor of master's degree programs in these fields. Laurel brings a wide portfolio of previous experience. So in terms of management of accreditation and quality assurance, professional experience in the economics of higher education and the strategic position of institutions, academic work and economic policy history, and active involvement and engagement in local government and nonprofit affairs. She holds degrees in public policy from the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton University and in graduate economics from Oxford University. So welcome, Laurel. Then we're going to hear from Maryland State Senator Dr. Clarence Lamb. He represents District 12, which bridges Baltimore and Howard counties in the Maryland General Assembly, where he serves on the Senate Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs Committee and the Executive Nominations Committee. As one of three doctors in the legislature and the only one in the Senate, he is currently serving on the Joint COVID-19 Legislative Work Group and the Senate Vaccine Oversight Work Group. Dr. Lamb serves on the faculty of the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health as an assistant scientist in the Department of Health Policy and Management. He leads the school's preventive medicine residency program as its program director and practices clinically as the medical director of occupational medicine at the Applied Physics Laboratory. As the interim director for occupational health services in the Department of Health, Safety, and Environment for the Hopkins system, he's responsible for the health and well-being of over 50,000 employees across Maryland, Washington, D.C., and Florida. Dr. Lamb is a Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Case Western Reserve University and completed his Bachelor's of Arts in Political Science and Biology. He later earned his medical degree from the University of Maryland and his Master's of Public Health from Johns Hopkins University. So each presenter will provide remarks first, and then we deliberately left a lot of time for questions because we know that so many of you are trying to navigate the graduate student process. So Brianna, we'll have you start.
All right, thank you for having us today. It is a pleasure to speak with all of you today. As I was introduced, my name is Brianna Suarez and I'm the International Admissions and Operations Manager here at APSIA. And I am delighted to talk to you all about graduate school, when you should be pursuing graduate school, tips to apply, financial aid, and so forth. I won't last too long in my slides because I'm eager to hear from my fellow panelists and from you all, but I'm happy to answer questions at the end. And with that, though, I am going to share my screen. I believe you can see that. Perfect. All right. So the first question we often get, right, is why should a student be considering graduate school? And there are many reasons why people choose to pursue a graduate degree. There may be changes in the salary depending on the sector that you're going into. There may be the focus of mastering a certain subject that you're really interested in, career advancement, professional focus. But again, the real answer comes down to you and where it is that you see yourself at moving forward. Many students find that going straight into the workforce after their undergraduate degree is the right choice for them. And then once they're in that field, they see that for the next step in their career, they may need a higher ed degree. And so you really have to think about where you're at and what are the things that you want to do moving forward in your career and why a graduate degree would make sense. Again, I won't last too long on these slides, although I could rant for as long as possible. And again, with international affairs, at least, it is a very broad field, and there are many things that you can do with a graduate degree in international affairs. It really comes down to connecting your interests and your goals with your professional goals. Many students tend to think that international affairs is just diplomacy and just the foreign service, when in all actuality, there are many things that you can do with an international affairs degree, such as business, such as law, education, conflict resolution. Space policy is a thing now, which I think is really cool. It really honestly comes down to you connecting the dots for yourself and what it is that you want to do in your professional career after you've graduated. But with that, when you are thinking about graduate school, we recommend that you start thinking about your application at least a year out before the application deadline. And that is because unlike in the undergraduate process, there is no common app. That is to say, there is no one application that you fill out that will go to all of the schools that you're interested in. You will most likely be applying to different schools that have all different deadlines, whether they be rolling, whether they be priority deadlines, spring deadlines, all of that. There are many things to keep track of. And so a year out is probably the best thing to do to make sure that you're doing all the best, taking all the best precautions and steps for yourself. You should be determining and researching graduate schools that you wish to pursue and casting a wide net. I often like to push students to think beyond the name and their rankings because many students think, right, that they have to go to a Harvard or a Princeton or a Yale and that's it. When honestly, there's so many programs and so many different schools out there that may be a better fit for you and what it is that you want to do moving forward. You should be creating a spreadsheet to track all of your deadlines because again, there may be many, many deadlines, not just for your applications, but for your financial aid as well. And you should honestly understand your financial situation. Probably, this is the first thing you should probably be doing, thinking about how you're going to be paying for graduate school and where you are at the moment of application, right? Because you want to make sure that you're looking for financial aid, scholarships, and fellowships as early as possible. Some of those scholarships have early deadlines, earlier than your application deadlines. And so you want to make sure that you're not missing out on any of the money that may be out there available to you so that you're not paying for graduate school out of pocket. And what are some of the questions you should be asking yourself when you're considering graduate school and what are the right programs for you? So the first is what will you study? And this is talking about the academic structure of the program. So are you someone that prefers daytime courses and so you're looking for early morning, afternoon courses, or will you be working part-time or full-time and thus be looking for night courses? Are you someone that prefers a rigid program versus a more flexible program? Do you prefer a semester system versus a quarter system? Again, there are many things that go into the academic structure and many programs are different in these terms. And so you want to make sure you're doing your research along those lines. The second is, are you qualified? Talking about the admissions criteria. Each school publishes their admitted numbers each year. So use these as a guidepost to figure out where you are at the time of admissions and what are the things that you need to work on. So for example, if a school has an average of a 158 verbal in the GREs, then you know that maybe you should be working on the GRE verbal section for that. That is not to say that if you don't hit all of those numbers that you won't get in, and vice versa, that if you hit all of those target numbers that you're automatically in. These are just averages, right? Some people fell below these numbers and some people went above them. These are just they are meant to be used as guideposts for you. The third, do you like being there? Again, the living environment. You will most likely be spending 2 years of your life there. And so you want to make sure you actually enjoy to be in that location. I am a city girl. I was born and raised in New York. So I know that a school, for example, in College Station, Texas would not have been the right option for me, and vice versa. If you are someone that prefers something a little bit more suburban or rural, then a school, for example, here in New York City, like Columbia SIPA, may not be the right option for you. Now with COVID, some schools are starting to open up tours, but if you're unable to take a tour, use Google Maps. That's what I used when I was researching my graduate schools, to see the location and the area. Or some schools also have virtual tours that you can take. Fourth, can you afford it? The financial situation, really understanding where you are financially before you apply is critical, because again, the number that schools will give you, that upfront ticket number, usually doesn't cover books, supplies, living costs, transportation, all of that. You want to make sure that you understand where you are. If you owe undergraduate loans, things like that, where you are financially before you apply, so that you know what are the financial aid options and scholarships that you will be looking for before the applications are in and you've been accepted, hopefully. What comes next is pretty important, the professional fit. And I will be coming back to this, and I'm sure my colleagues will also be coming back to this throughout our discussion today. Really, what comes next? Where are you headed after graduation, and what it is that you realistically want to do with this degree? And it is okay not to know. You know, schools do not expect you to have your whole life planned out, but you should have some idea of what it is that you want to do moving forward. A tip that I like to give to students is look at the alumni of the programs in the school and see what they're doing with those degrees. You know, use LinkedIn as a tool to see what it is that they're actively doing and what are some of the possibilities for you, and chat with them, right? Reach out and ask, you know, what was their trajectory into their career paths. And I'm sorry that I'm going through these a little quicker than usual, but happy to delve a little bit deeper into these moving forward. So as you're preparing to apply, you should be seeking out admissions counselors and asking them questions past those that you have on the website. So, you know, we often say, ask the admissions counselor what the priorities of the admissions committee is. Not just when is your deadline, when should I be applying, what are your GRE average numbers. They are the best resources for you as you're applying, because they know their school better than anyone and they know what they're looking for in an applicant. So make sure you're taking advantage of those resources. Finalizing your list of desired programs, there is no right number of schools that you should be applying to, as long as they're the right program for you and your professional career moving forward, and that you can afford to apply to them, because many schools, if not all, if I'm not mistaken, charge for you to apply. Some schools do offer application fee waivers. That is a pro tip I like to give. So make sure that you're looking into those so you save yourself some bit of money. Make sure that you're identifying weaknesses in your application. Again, this is coming back to the admissions criteria that I spoke to earlier. Taking any standardized tests such as the GRE or the GMAT, begin to gather application materials and apply for outside scholarships, and reaching out to recommenders. Making sure you're reaching out to people who can best speak to your skills and why you would be an asset to that school. So what does a typical application look like for graduate school? We can't stress that all schools will vary, but this is generally what it looks like. There's an application form and an application fee. They ask for your CV or resume. Please know the difference, and know, especially if you're applying to schools outside of your home country, make sure you understand what their definition of a resume or CV is. Official transcripts from each institution you've matriculated into, standardized test scores if they are required, personal statements and or topical essays, 2 to 3 letters of recommendation, and bank statements. Now, bank statements are not just for financial aid. They are also for students looking to study outside of their home country, because the hosting country is going to want to see that you have the financial means to sustain yourself throughout the 2 years that you are in country. So I'm going through these so quickly. All right. So this is generally how we recommend you tackle your essays and personal statements for graduate school applications. You should be talking about the where have you been portion, the where are you now, and where are you headed. So the where have you been is where you're outlining your qualifications. You don't have to spend too much time here because schools do have your resume and transcripts on hand, but they should be things that maybe you weren't able to elaborate on your resume. Maybe it was a meaningful experience that you had, or a really bad internship that led you to discover that you were really interested in this one thing versus what you thought you were interested in. Either way, that should lead you into the where are you now, where you convey your passion, right? What it is that you want to study, and why does this topic excite you? And especially what motivates you to go to graduate school now, not 2 years ago when your professor recommended it, not because the job market is not the greatest that it could be right now, not because you thought, you know, what the heck, might as well go today. You really should be thinking about why you're headed to graduate school, and why you're interested in going at this point in your life, right? Which should lead you to explaining your goals, the where are you headed? Again, the professional fit. Why this school, and this school in particular? Why this program in particular out of all the programs you could have chosen? And what will you do with the degree once you leave and once you've graduated? Again, this is not to say you need to have your whole life planned out, because things will change inevitably, but you should have some understanding of where you see yourself and where you see your professional career moving forward. After all, graduate school is a choice, it is not required. So if you are choosing to go to graduate school, admissions committees want to see that you've thought through this thoroughly and that you are taking this process seriously. And so if you hit the where have you been, where are you headed, and where have you been, where you are, and where are you headed, that is kind of the basis for a personal statement and essay. And so what are some application mistakes that you should avoid? First is failing to follow basic instructions, making sure you're providing everything that is required of you to make sure that your application is complete. The second is making foolish mistakes, especially in your essays. Make sure that you are providing the correct essay to the correct school. It has happened already this year. It will happen again. You want to make sure you're avoiding that. And again, I'm happy to delve a little bit deeper into this through your questions. And then the last is not conducting an honest self-assessment of your skills and interests. You want to make sure that you're discerning what you want to master and why, and disclose any issue straightforwardly so that the admissions committee doesn't have any questions after they've read your application. So ultimately, what does a school look for in an applicant for graduate school? The first are pretty straightforward. It's an aptitude for study and a chance of success in the program. This is why they're asking for your transcripts and your resume, because you are applying to a school after all. They also want to see experiences and perspectives that will help others succeed. This is why we often tell students that it is great to hone in on things that you've done in the past that may be off the beaten road, you know, may not be the traditional path as many seem to think international affairs is. It would be pretty boring if we all spoke and thought the same way in the same, you know, thought process. And then lastly, again, a clear sense of professional direction, what it is you want to do moving forward. Where do you see yourself career-wise after you've graduated? Then I know I shouldn't rush to this because I know there are many questions on this, but the paying for school. Yes, graduate school is expensive. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but there are many ways to pay for it that are not out of pocket, so long as you do your research as early as possible, right? There is merit and need-based aid. Please know the difference, as some schools will offer both. Some schools only offer one and some schools offer neither. There are research and teaching assistant positions available. This is really seen within the PhD track. There is assistance provided by the Central University of Programs within the school. And then there are also external sources of funding, such as grants, loans, and scholarships. And there are many ways to do your research for scholarships. There are ways based on your career path of your interest. There are ways based on things you've done in the past, such as the Coverdell Fellows Program, which is meant for returning Peace Corps volunteers. You can do your research based on your citizenship. You can do your research based on your nationality. You can do your research if you're underrepresented in a certain field. You can do your research if you're interested in a very niche topic. Again, it really comes down to doing your research as early as possible, and take it from someone that didn't do that and has now, in working in this field, has found many scholarships that I would have qualified for graduate school. It really comes down to doing the research early and making sure that you are taking advantage of all of the money that is out there available to you. And this is my last slide because I'm eager to hear from the rest of our colleagues, but what are some things that you can build and work on to be competitive before you even start considering applying to graduate school? The first is building some professional experience. This is not to say you need a 9 to 5 or that you need to go straight into the workforce as soon as you've graduated from your undergraduate degree. But having some professional experience gives you some insight into what you actually are interested in versus what you aren't interested in. Schools do like to see some professional experience. And this could also just be working as a barista, caretaking, things like that are considered non-traditional work experience. In parentheses, we have international because it's great to have international experience, but we understand that not every student has that possibility. The ability to write well and speak comfortably in different formats and to different audiences is extremely important. You should be working on these skills because they're going to be extremely necessary, even if you're not considering graduate school, right? This is something that the workforce and your employers will be looking for, that you are able to do, to have these skills, right? If you're unable to convey messages past the 40-page paper, if you can't write talking points, if you're unable to give a speech, then those skills and the knowledge that you may have may all go to waste. Understanding project management, how things come together, how projects are cleaned up is extremely important. You don't need a certificate for this. And then lastly, building your network, making sure you're staying in contact with supervisors, alumni from your undergraduate undergraduate institutions, professors that you've worked with in the past, and your peers, those that you studied along with, because you really never know who's going to help you in getting that next job and getting into the next step in your life, or helping write your recommendation letter for graduate school. And again, I know I went fairly quickly through the entire process, but I want to make sure I leave ample time for my colleagues to speak and mainly to hear from all of you. So thank you for that. And I'm eager to hear all of your questions.
Laurel?
Thank you, Anne. Hi, everybody. As Anne said, I'm Laurel McFarland. I'm the Executive Director of NASPA, which is 325 schools in the US and around the world that are in the business of providing degrees in public service education. That can be Master of Public Policy, Master of Public Administration, Development Policy, all sorts of different things. And in fact, the specialized degrees are growing within our field. So Brianna, you did such a nice job of the overview of how to apply things to be on your mind and so on. And there's actually huge amount of overlap if you're interested in applying for a public policy or public administration, public affairs degree, as what Brianna was just describing for applying for international affairs degrees. So fortunately, she's covered so much and so well about the actual process. Anne asked me to kind of get a little more inside and give some suggestions from our neck of the woods about applying to MPA programs and MPP programs. So, you start with the basic thought processes that Brianna was just talking about. Why I go to grad school at all, and all of you are interested in public service and this connection between liberal arts undergraduate education and thinking about yourself in terms of public service, which is great. But it's also, as you're thinking about grad school, think about grad school for public service and why. And so, to add on to what Brianna said, why go to grad school in this public service area? Some of the reasons are the same why you go to grad school in any other field. Some of them are very specific to our field. The usual thing applies about you're applying because you're ambitious and you want to be a leader, and that more opportunity to learn, to go deep and go wide into your field is a way of preparing yourself for leadership. And it's not bad at all to be ambitious, to want to be the best, to want to have an impact, to want to make change. That's all really good. And that's part of the reason why you go to grad schools, for the challenge of it. It's hard, and especially if they're the research component, you have to be comfortable with yourself and why you're doing this. It's also in public service, just like any other field. Grad school is good if you want to become an expert, if you want to go really deep in your field and to be recognized externally. Graduate degrees are external recognition that you are an expert in this field. You can always develop expertise on the job, but to actually get a credential that is recognized outside of your job, that you are competent in this field. A grad degree is a concise way of communicating that you have a toolbox for understanding and communicating the world. So if you want to go deep, graduate school is a good way to do it. As Brianna covered so well, it's also a springboard to career advancement. And, in some cases, it's kind of a ticket to opportunities that might be closed to people holding bachelor's degrees only. And in our field, for example, most of the principal investigators on big grants have graduate degrees. And that's important sometimes to the consideration of those grants, that the people who are at the top of the pyramid of people who are administering that grant are leaders and experts in their field. Now, unlike one thing I will mention about international affairs, public policy, and public administration is none of these fields are licensed professions. And we'll have a chance later, I think, to talk about the MPH. But MDs and other degrees that are licensed professions, you have to have a graduate degree and you have to take a board exam and so forth. The entry into our field is a little bit fuzzier, because it isn't. Public policy is not a licensed profession. Anyone can actually, as you know, can go out and announce they're a public policy expert in the field. And so education is part of the way that we document and exhibit that you are an expert in the field. Brianna mentioned salary. I think if you are considering a graduate degree for the salary, public service may not be the place that you're going to maximize that in two ways. One is that generally starting salaries are a bit lower in public service than elsewhere. But I also think it's very important. It's not a vow of poverty, go into public service, and particularly with the graduate degree. You are not taking of it. Some people think you are essentially saying, I'm going to be a monk and that money doesn't matter. That's not true. It does matter, and you do earn a living in public service. But one of the most striking areas is later in your career, salary trajectories do tend to be flatter in public service, because the top civil servants, the top public servants are generally not earning anywhere close to what their peers are, who are similarly high achievers in the private sector and elsewhere. So, even though you're not taking a vow of poverty, it is not going to be an income maximizing strategy for your whole life to go into public service. Recognize that. But, it's about, if you feel that calling, if you feel you want to change the world, make change, etc., it's a good choice. Finally, why get an MPA or MPP specifically? We're just talking about international affairs degrees. I think you ask yourself, do I get an academic degree? Do I get a professional degree? A professional degree in this field of public service is about acting, leading, changing, running things. In short, doing things. That's why you get a professional degree, because you're going to act and do and change and run things. The academic degrees, more in terms of analyzing, theorizing, conceptualizing, evaluating, recommending. These are all important in the policy process and in public service. But the emphasis in the MPA in particular is on action and doing and managing. And the word administration is kind of an old-fashioned word. It's a Master of Public Administration. But what it means in modern terms is running and changing and doing. So that's the simplest way I have to explain. If you're thinking across different degrees, an MPA is also, in comparison to some other degrees, a more generalist degree. Now, within that, it combines management and, operations, often with specific content and specific content areas and policy areas and management areas. And you will get a combination of those things in the MPA and MPP degree. Also evolving, just like everything else, is new things coming into the field. Data analytics, for example. Most of our programs now offer data analytics as part of the toolbox that they are preparing you to go out into the world with. So how to find the degree, specifically in our field, be a detective, don't be passive and just wait for the ads to drop into your mailbox and so forth. They will, especially if you're on websites where, particular universities have bought AdWords on Google AdWords and things. You can search on sites like AppSia and our site for all of our members have profiles and things up about what they do. Look specifically at things like what specializations does the school offer, not just because that's all important to your degree, but it gives you insight into the strengths of a particular program that you might be looking at. It will tell you where there are faculty that are really working in areas that might be of interest to you. And I would also say, if there are schools that interest you and programs, don't be shy about contacting both the admissions office and, respectfully, individual professors. If there's a professor who's doing research in an area that interests you, this is how grad school is a little different than undergrad. Don't be afraid to contact them respectfully. Like, don't be weird and be sending them messages every day, or asking them to do things for you or whatever. But to respectfully inquire about their work and what sorts of courses or opportunities there might be in a particular field. Totally appropriate. Don't be weird, but don't be afraid, and don't be shy about contacting, especially if you have any interest in a PhD. Because if you apply for a PhD in public policy, public administration, and so forth, you will need someone at that particular university who is working in the field in which you would want to be doing your thesis, et cetera. So finally, I would say, with respect to scholarships, that we are in a unique policy environment right now. We're just 2 days ago, Elizabeth Warren put a hold on the nomination of the guy who is the Biden administration is nominating to be the Undersecretary of Education. You might ask, why is all this important? Well, the reason Senator Warren put a hold on it was to call attention to two things, one of which is the current fate of public service loan forgiveness. 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, Congress passed a law that you all may be familiar with, that if you work in public service for 10 years, that your loans that you incurred preparing for that should be forgiven at the end of 10 years of demonstrated public service. As you may also know from the headlines, during the Trump administration, 99% of the graduates who applied for those public service loan forgiveness were denied. James Cavall is a guy who wants to reform the program and make it more universal for the graduates to apply for that program. And Elizabeth Warren is calling attention to the importance of James Cavall and the need for the administration to pay more attention to public service loan forgiveness. So if you are pondering going to graduate school in public service, this is directly of interest to you. What is happening in Washington, D.C. right this week with Elizabeth Warren's hold on James Cavall's appointment. But, I think it goes to say that, master's degrees generally qualify for less financial aid than PhD programs. And as Brianna said, some schools are very generous that they have endowments, they have other sources of income that they can offer both need-based merit aid. Be sure to shop around, particularly if you are a very capable Phi Beta Kappa alum, et cetera. You may well qualify for merit aid from some of these schools. But do remember, on the other end, there is the possibility in our specific field of public service for student loan forgiveness, but you will have to watch the political developments to see whether that is the case for you 10 years from now when you would actually be eligible for it. So one last piece of advice in terms of all this, NASPA, we really recommend working between undergrad and grad. And one of the reasons is, like research assistants and so forth, fine. Those are jobs that particularly students interested in Masters of Public Policy might do. But if you're interested in an MPA, if you're interested in public service in terms of changing and acting and doing, you are coming from an educationally privileged background. Some of you may be coming from an economically privileged background. And in public service, you need to know what need looks like and what despair and dependency and human struggle and deprivation look like, and people's wants and hopes that if you remain educationally privileged and go into public service, there is a tendency to sometimes decide what's best for people. And people with graduate degrees in public service are sometimes accused of that. And one of the best ways to prepare yourself for a career in public service is to get out there and be involved in direct service, in direct public service, maybe for a year or two, but to really get your hands, to roll up your sleeves and get your hands dirty in actual public service. And that matters. One of the things Brianna touched on is, when you write your application to graduate school, your service record also matters. And in fact, I've seen many students over the years who may not have impeccable academic credentials, but they have combined academic preparation with public service preparation of actually working in direct public service. And that matters in applications. And to have the opportunity to do that, we think it is very important. For some of you, going directly to graduate school may be appropriate, but for many of you, working and understanding what public need is can be a vital preparation as well for careers in this area. So, Anne, there's a lot of other things I could say, but hopefully the students themselves will have these questions. As Brianna just said, she just put the her contact information for APSI. I would say the same thing. I'm happy to follow up with any of you who have a specific interest in MPA or MPP education, and you can just contact me directly. I'm McFarland, and I'll put it in the chat, mcfarland@naspa.org. So I'm happy. And also, I have 325 admission directors at my on my Rolodex, and also our staff who are very specifically knowledgeable on some aspects of financial aid and applications and so forth. So thank you.
Thank you. Just since we do have a hard stop at 1:20 to match mentors, what I'm going to have is Dr. Lamb give his full presentation for students. If you could type any questions in the chat, and then we will connect them to the speakers afterwards and then send the responses back all to you. So we want to make sure that your questions get asked, but Dr. Lamb has such valuable information. I know you'll want to hear from him directly. So we're looking forward to your presentation, Dr. Lamb.
Sure, thanks, Anne. Looking forward to just spending a few minutes talking about the Masters in Public Health. And I think Brianna's given some great kind of general advice in applying for graduate programs. A lot of that does apply to applying for MPHs as well as what Laurel had spoken to too. And I'll touch on and reemphasize some of those as it applies to the Masters in Public Health. But public health, as as we near the tail end of this pandemic finally, is a huge field, and it's hugely important, right? And so I think in the past there's probably been a lesser appreciation for public health and what that actually means for the general community. I think now when you say public health, most folks have some general sense, if not in the immediate sense and reaction to what that means for them. And so getting into the field of public health now is really getting into a field that's growing, that's expanding, that has certainly more appreciation and attention than maybe it has had in the past. And one of the things that I wanted to highlight for those of you who may be interested in this field is that number one, it's just a very diverse field. And so when people say getting going into public health or getting a master's degree in public health, the field itself of public health encompasses many different areas, which I think plays to its strengths. So it includes things like epidemiology, which is the study of how diseases spread, and biostatistics, which is how you can calculate risk factors and assess the likelihood that people would contract conditions or diseases. It includes health policy. So those of you who are interested in kind of the policy environment, and even in parts of public policy that Laurel was touching on, you know, we also within public health include a lot of health policy aspects of that. Global health, which is huge when it comes to international health and dealing with some of the challenges in developing nations, and some of the health inadequacies around the world and disparities. Global health is tremendous. Women's and reproductive health, also a growing field that's really important. Mental health issues that also now has greater appreciation and attention to. Health behavior and lifestyle changes, lifestyle medicine, all things that all play into public health and people's perception of it as well. As well as, you know, newer fields like informatics, health IT, data analytics. They are all integral parts of public health. And so, you know, one of the nice things is that if you get a public health degree and an MPH, that oftentimes we see graduates that go on to do a variety of different things, that you're not kind of stuck in one career path or stuck in one narrow swim lane, that oftentimes those who get a public health degree or MPH will switch careers, will switch different pathways during their career. They may start out interested in global international health. After a few years working for, say, a nonprofit or the World Health Organization, might want to come back domestically, and they're able to take the tools and the skills that they learned as part of their MPH training and be able to apply it for, let's say, domestic health policy. And then after a few years working there, they may want to go work for a local health department in, say, environmental health, in addressing climate change needs. And so they can switch into that pathway as well. Because public health and MPH gives some very diverse training and skills and knowledge, you're able to apply that in so many different ways that it opens up many different doors later on for you to be able to pursue. As well as you know, other related fields. So we bring in, as part of the MPH training, not just epidemiology and biostatistics, but also healthcare and medicine, advocacy and management, and even the law are all integral parts of how public health is able to function. And so, you know, if that attracts you, this is a field that you should certainly look into. And it also touches on, and I think Laurel touched on this too, you know, that it can be very practical as a degree. There are certainly folks that go to, you know, leading programs or managing health IT projects or working on advocacy to improve certain policies. That it is a very practical degree. On the other hand, if people want to apply it towards more of an academic kind of perspective, we certainly have folks that, you know, start with their MPH and kind of go along an academic pathway as well, and oftentimes may seek a DRPH, which is the doctorate in public health, or a PhD afterwards. So there are a lot of possibilities and opportunities that are open for folks who are interested in that. You know, I think it was touched on earlier as well, timing for graduate school, making sure that you meet some of the requirements that are needed for applying to an MPH degree. Timing is always important. I think, you know, Laurel mentioned that it's oftentimes useful and maybe valuable to be able to have some practical experience going into applying for grad school. So if you're looking at other jobs or positions beforehand, just to get some experience under your belt, that may be a good thing. Some schools actually require you to have some practicum experience before you apply for the MPH. So that's something that you should look into depending on the school that you're applying for. And you know, the other piece of advice too, because the MPH tuition can be, you know, can be pricey. You know, there are opportunities sometimes to look for, obviously, scholarships, but also look for locations that may be willing to provide you some educational credits if you're working for them as well. And kind of the secret behind the MPH is that oftentimes the longer that you're in a work environment, the more likely you can actually find someone else to help subsidize part of that or pay for your MPH as part of kind of a work training project that you may be working on. And so just another possibility to kind of float out there and keep that in mind. The application process would suggest, starting a year out, looking at the different schools that you're interested in applying for, looking at the different requirements, because as I mentioned, there are different requirements depending on how that school is oriented and the types of candidates that they're seeking. The curriculum can also be different with each of these schools. Some of them are 2 years, 2-year master's programs in public health. Some are 1 year. It depends on whether there's a practicum requirement attached to it or not oftentimes. Some other programs are also structured so that they're based on a semester system. Others are based still on a quarter system. And so what that means is that, sometimes on a quarter system, things move very quickly. However, you're able to take more courses. So you get a little more variety there, perhaps, if it's only a 1-year program. It may be less of a difference if it's a 2-year program. And other programs are structured so that they're based on a semester system. And so you may be able to have a chance to go into a little bit more depth in each of the course topics, but then the courses are also a little bit longer. So something to certainly keep an eye out for and pay attention to as you're applying for different programs. As others have mentioned too, reach out to current students and recent graduates so that you can get a sense of how each of those programs are structured and any tips that they may have in the application process that are specific to that school. And I think both of the prior speakers touched on this as well. The MPH degree, can allow you to go oftentimes in 2 very different directions, both the public sector and the private sector. Most folks will go into the public sector, after getting an MPH. It's just kind of more often the tread pathway that folks will go into, federal, state, local government, or, global health, international health, nonprofits or NGOs. But, it also gives you enough training to be able to go into the private sector world too. If you are interested in that, oftentimes people go into startups, healthcare consulting, health insurance companies, healthcare systems, and the like. And that can be very marketable and useful if you go into those fields too. Weighing those two, you want to keep that in mind for your future career. The public sector, as I think Laurel mentioned, can be a little bit less nimble. It's a little less slow. It's obviously not as financially, most of the time, it's not as financially lucrative as if you went into the private sector. The other benefits, though, is that sometimes it can be more stable. And so, those careers, once you get into them, if you decide to stay along that pathway, you may have some additional routes to be able to pursue, whereas in the private sector, you may have to move around a little bit more. And so, as you look at the options that you have later on, would certainly weigh those as well. I think in the interest of time, I think most of what else I was going to cover was already touched on as well, but just wanted to make that plug again that, certainly the world of public health is vast and diverse. If you're interested in working a lot of different things and being able to have many opportunities during your career to be able to switch gears into different areas, if you like that kind of environment, public health and getting an MPH is certainly right up your alley. But if you are interested in just kind of working in an academic role or working in a private sector, those opportunities are obviously out there for those who want to pursue an MPH as well. So let me wrap there and want to make sure that we save some time for questions. I'll turn it over to Anne.
Thank you so much. Because we're matching the students with mentors at 1:30, I think what I'm going to ask, and if it's okay with the panelists, we've captured all of the questions that are in the chat, and then we'll circulate them to the panelists, and then and then take those collective responses and share them with the students. Would that be okay?
Sure.
Wonderful.
Sure.
Okay. And if for some reason you weren't able to get your question into the chat, please feel free to send it to either Nora, myself, or Vivian, and we'll make sure they get incorporated into a master list. So we cannot cannot thank Brianna, Laurel, and Clarence enough for the helpful tips that they were able to provide. Hopefully what you've heard was kind of good general best practices from Brianna. And then we dug deeper for MPH and MPA programs about how you can think about and differentiate. I know some of you coming from broad liberal arts and sciences backgrounds are trying to figure out, which program makes the most sense. I don't know which one to balance. Should I do medical school or MPH? And we hope that some of these questions we're bringing you closer to that resolution, although we can't make that decision for you. We're trying to make sure that you have a very clear understanding of the types of programs out there. So again, please send those questions, and I hope you'll join me in thanking the panelists for really providing a wonderful overview in such a brief amount of time. We really appreciate the thought that you put into the explaining your processes for the students.
And best wishes to all of the students. Good luck in your studies and careers.
Thank you so much.